My name is John Miller. I'm 44 years old and I live in Texas. For the last 10 years, I've worked long hours as a contractor, saving every dime to buy a home with a yard big enough for my kids to run in, for my wife to garden in, and for me to finally feel like I had my own slice of peace. That yard became my sanctuary. I built a wooden fence along the property line, not just to mark the boundary, but to give my family privacy, safety, and space. Every board, every nail, I put in myself. That fence meant more to me than just lumber. It was the line between what was mine and what wasn't. But one morning that line was gone. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee, ready to start my day, and my stomach dropped. The fence had moved. Not broken. Not collapsed. Moved. Several feet of my yard were just gone. Swallowed up overnight. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I'd misjudged the angle. But as I walked along the fence line, the truth hit me. My neighbor, Rick, had shifted the entire fence during the night. Posts ripped out. Replanted on his side. The boundary line stolen one plank at a time. I stood there in disbelief, staring at the fresh dirt around the posts, the tools still leaning on his side of the yard, as if he didn't even care to hide what he'd done. When I confronted him, Rick didn't deny it. He actually smiled. The fence was in the wrong spot anyway, he said, arms crossed like he'd done me a favor. This is the real line. You're welcome, my blood boiled. I knew exactly where the property line was. I had the deed, the original survey, everything. That fence had been right where it belonged for years. This wasn't a correction. This was theft. But Rick wasn't just arrogant. He was smug. He leaned over the new fence, smirk on his face, and added, "You can argue all you want, John, but you can't prove a thing. And good luck paying for a new survey." That was the moment my shock turned into something else. Because what Rick didn't know was that I had already scheduled a surveyor for a landscaping project. In fact, the man was sitting in my truck at that very moment, clipboard in hand, watching the whole exchange. Rick thought he was clever. He thought he'd stolen part of my yard while I slept, but he had no idea the truth was already parked in my driveway, waiting to expose him. If you'd asked me a year ago what kind of life I had, I would have told you it was steady. Not glamorous, not flashy, but steady. And that's exactly what I wanted. I grew up in a small Texas town where land meant everything. My father used to say, "Son, they're not making more of it. Treat every inch you get like gold." Those words stuck with me. For years I rented apartments, saved every dollar, and worked jobs that chewed up my back and my hands. All because I wanted to own something of my own, something I could pass on to my kids. When I finally bought my house, it felt like victory, a 3-bedroom ranch with a wide backyard and enough space to breathe. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. My wife loved the garden beds. My kids loved the swing set. And me, I loved the fence. I know that sounds strange, but that fence symbolized everything I'd worked for. I built it myself, right on the property line, with sweat and sore muscles. Each post I sank into the ground felt like staking my claim, not just on dirt, but on the life I'd built. That fence wasn't just wood. It was peace of mind. At first, my neighbor Rick seemed fine. He'd wave when he mowed his lawn. We'd exchange a quick word if we took the trash out at the same time. Nothing more, nothing less. I figured he was just another hard-working guy trying to enjoy his home. Same as me. But then, little comments started slipping out. The first time, it seemed like a joke. He pointed at my fence and said, "Funny how property lines are always a little fuzzy, huh?" I laughed politely and shrugged it off. Another time, when my kids were playing catch in the backyard, he muttered, "Hope they don't toss that ball over too far." Wouldn't want them trespassing again. I brushed it aside. People joke in strange ways, but over time, the jokes felt less like jokes and more like jabs. He'd stand by the fence, arms folded, staring at the line like it was a personal insult. He complained that my garden beds were too close. He grumbled about shadows from my trees crossing onto his lawn. One afternoon he even said, half serious, "You know, John, you don't really need all that yard. Some of that space would look a lot better on my side." I laughed it off, but inside a knot started to form. Still, I believed in being a good neighbor. I offered him extra vegetables from our garden. I invited him to join us for a barbecue once. He declined. My wife said he seemed the type who didn't like anyone too close. "Let him be," she told me. "Some people are just grumpy." So I let it go. Life carried on. The kids ran through sprinklers in the summer. My wife tended to her roses. I grilled steaks on Saturday evenings. And that fence stood tall, marking the boundary between our world and his. I thought the worst I had to deal with was a neighbor with a sour attitude. I thought respect for property was something everyone understood, especially out here in Texas. But I was wrong, because Rick didn't just dislike the fence. He resented it. To him, every board I hammered into the ground was a reminder of what wasn't his. And while I thought he was just a man with a bad sense of humor, he was already planning something far worse. Looking back, I can see the signs more clearly. The way he lingered by the fence at night, measuring it with his eyes. The way he talked about property lines being tricky. The way he always acted like I didn't deserve the space I had. But at the time, I ignored them. Because I believed in fairness. I believed neighbors respected boundaries. I believed hard work earned security. I believed wrong. The life I thought I had, a home, a yard, and the peace of knowing my boundaries were secure, was about to be tested. And the man testing it had no idea that when he made his move, I'd be ready. At first, it was just little things, annoyances I brushed off. Rick seemed to take an unusual interest in my property, always watching from his side, leaning on the fence with that smug half smile, like he knew something I didn't. He'd make remarks that got under my skin. "Funny how your fence doesn't quite look straight from over here. You sure your deed matches where you put that? Land boundaries are tricky. Most people don't even know where theirs really end." I'd laugh politely, but my jaw would tighten. I knew exactly where my property line was. I had the original survey from when I bought the house, and I'd built the fence to match it. There was no fuzziness about it. Still, the comments kept coming. Then came the complaints. He said my kid's soccer ball kept rolling onto his lawn. He said my dog barked too close to his window. He even claimed the shade from my oak tree was messing up his grass. Every week it was something new, and every time I tried to reason with him, it turned into another chance for him to bring up the fence. One afternoon he leaned over and said, "You know, John, if you just moved that fence a few feet back, we wouldn't have all these problems." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about grass, dogs, or kids. This was about land. He wanted more of it, and my fence stood in his way. I didn't argue. I just shook my head and walked away. But inside, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. Weeks passed and Rick's attitude got bolder. He stopped being subtle. One night, as I was grilling on the patio, he called over. "That fence won't last forever. Might as well fix it right before someone else does." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat. I started paying closer attention. I noticed him outside at odd hours, pacing near the fence line with a tape measure in his hand. I saw him talking to another neighbor, gesturing toward my yard as if staking a claim. and each time that smug smirk was plastered on his face. I told my wife I was worried. She tried to calm me down, said I was reading too much into it. But I'd worked too hard for that land to dismiss the warning signs. Something was coming. I could feel it. And then, one morning it happened. I stepped outside, coffee mug in hand, ready for another ordinary day. But the second my eyes hit the backyard, the mug slipped from my fingers and shattered on the patio. The fence was gone, not destroyed, moved. Posts uprooted and reset several feet into my yard. Fresh dirt piled around them, still damp from the night's work. My garden bed was half outside the fence now. The kids' swing set, which had always been safely inside, was suddenly straddling the boundary. I felt my blood pressure surge. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a storm knocking something loose. This was deliberate. Rick had waited until nightfall, then moved the entire fence under cover of darkness, stealing several feet of my yard as if it belonged to him. I stormed over, fists clenched, and found him already outside, sipping his morning coffee like nothing was wrong. "Rick, what the hell is this?" I demanded. He didn't even flinch. He just smirked and said, "Fixed it for you." That old fence was in the wrong spot. This is the real property line. My jaw dropped. The real line? Based on what? He shrugged. Common sense. And if you don't like it, you can go pay for a new survey. But I promise, John, you won't like what it shows. The arrogance in his voice was staggering. He was so confident, so sure I couldn't touch him. He thought he had boxed me in, that I'd either accept the theft or spend thousands trying to prove him wrong. For a moment I stood there in silence, fury boiling inside me. But then something strange happened. Instead of panicking, I felt a calm wash over me. Because what Rick didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that I'd already scheduled a surveyor to come by that very week for a landscaping project. And at that exact moment, the surveyor was sitting in my truck, clipboard in hand, watching the whole exchange unfold. Rick thought he was clever, that he'd stolen a piece of my life without consequence. But he had just made the biggest mistake of his own, because he hadn't just moved my fence. He had moved the fight into my territory, and I had all the proof I needed to bring him down. When Rick smirked and told me the fence was in the right spot now, I felt something snap inside me. Not in the loud, angry way most people imagine. I didn't shout, I didn't swing, I didn't threaten. Instead, my chest went still, like a storm cloud finally deciding to break. For weeks, I'd tried to convince myself his comments were just jokes, that the pacing with his tape measure was just paranoia on my part, that the complaints about my dog and my kids were nothing more than neighborly irritations. But standing there, watching the morning sun hit the fresh dirt around those stolen posts, I knew the truth. This wasn't irritation. This wasn't miscommunication. This was theft. He had knocked the fence down in frustration. He hadn't asked for mediation or a conversation. No, he had waited until night, pulled up the posts I had sunk into the ground with my own hands, and stolen a slice of my yard while my family slept just feet away. That wasn't just disrespect, that was war. And the arrogance in his voice when he told me I couldn't prove him wrong, that was the gasoline poured on the fire. What he didn't know, of course, was that my surveyor had been scheduled for weeks. A simple landscaping project had turned into the perfect timing of fate. And at that very moment, that man was sitting quietly in my truck, clipboard in hand, witnessing every word of Rick's smug confession. The surveyor stepped out of the truck a few minutes later, professional and calm. He didn't say a word, just gave me a nod that said it all. "You're not crazy, and he's in trouble." It was strange, the calm that settled over me then. I should have been furious, My hands should have been shaking with rage, but instead, I felt a kind of cold focus I'd only ever felt once before, when my wife was in labor and I realized the only thing I could do was stay calm and handle what came next. That was the moment I stopped seeing Rick as a neighbor. He wasn't the guy across the fence anymore. He wasn't just a nuisance with a sour attitude. He was the man who had declared himself my enemy. And in that moment, I understood something crystal clear. This wasn't going to end with an apology. This wasn't going to be solved with a handshake or a barbecue truce. Rick had crossed the line, literally and figuratively. And if I wanted my peace back, I wasn't going to get it by yelling over the fence. I was going to get it by preparing, quietly and carefully, until the evidence was stacked so high he couldn't climb out from under it. That was the moment my role shifted. I wasn't just the homeowner shocked by betrayal anymore. I was the man planning payback, not with fists or noise, but with proof and patience. Rick thought he'd gotten away with something. He thought he'd stolen a few feet of land and left me powerless to stop him. But in reality, he had just written his own downfall, because when the time came, it wouldn't be my word against his. It would be the truth, nailed down in survey maps, deeds, and testimony. And when that truth came crashing down on him, every smug word he'd ever thrown at me would choke in his throat. That morning, as I stood in my yard staring at the crooked line of stolen boards, I realized something that almost made me laugh. Rick thought moving my fence had weakened me, but in reality, it had given me strength. The kind of strength that comes when you stop being shocked and start planning. After that morning, I didn't waste another ounce of energy yelling at Rick. What good would it do? He thrived on conflict. He wanted me to explode so he could twist it around and make me look unreasonable. So instead, I went quiet. Silence, I realized, wasn't weakness. It was a weapon. The first step was documentation. My surveyor, who had witnessed the fence move firsthand, began his work immediately. He pulled the property deed, measured every inch, and compared it to official records. By the end of the week, I had a signed, sealed survey map that showed exactly what I already knew. Rick had moved the fence several feet onto my property. I made copies, digital, printed, notarized. One went into a folder labeled fence theft. Another went into a fireproof safe in the garage. A third was scanned into a cloud drive. Then I started photographing everything. Wide shots of the fence line, close-ups of the fresh dirt, time-stamped images showing the before and after difference. I even dug up old photos, backyard birthdays, barbecues, my kids' swing set, all clearly showing where the fence had been for years. Piece by piece, I was building an airtight case. Meanwhile, I kept my demeanor calm around Rick. When he'd swagger by the new fence, sipping his coffee with that smug grin, I'd nod politely as if nothing was wrong. The less he suspected, the bolder he became. And the bolder he became, the more ammunition he handed me. One afternoon, he actually boasted to another neighbor, loud enough for me to hear. Finally got the line fixed. Took some muscle, but I handled it myself. He can't prove a thing. Oh, how wrong he was. The second step was legal preparation. I scheduled a consultation with a property lawyer. I walked in with my folder under my arm, and by the time I finished laying everything out, survey maps, photos, timestamps, the lawyer leaned back in his chair and gave a low whistle. "This is ironclad," he said. "He didn't just encroach a few inches. He stole a measurable portion of your lot. Courts don't like that. You'll not only get your land back, you'll likely get damages too." That was music to my ears, but I didn't stop there. The lawyer advised me to also involve the HOA. Our neighborhood had strict rules about property boundaries, and Rick had violated every single one of them. I drafted a formal complaint, attached the surveyor's findings, and submitted it quietly. The HOA board called me within days. "We'll review this at the next meeting," they said. "And we'll be inviting Rick to attend as well." Perfect. The third step was patience. Revenge like this couldn't be rushed. I kept living my life, mowing my lawn, grilling with my family, waving at other neighbors. All the while, Rick strutted around, thinking he had outsmarted me. He bragged to anyone who'd listen that he had corrected the property line. He even started moving lawn furniture and garden pots into the stolen strip of yard, claiming it as his own. Every move he made I documented, photos, dates, witness statements. By the time the hearing rolled around, I had a mountain of evidence taller than the fence itself. But the best part? He didn't know I had it. Rick thought the fight was over. He thought I'd rolled over in defeat, too cheap or too scared to prove him wrong. He had no idea that every quiet nod, every polite smile I gave him was just me sharpening the knife. At home, my wife noticed my calm. "You're not even angry anymore," she said one evening. I smiled. "That's because anger doesn't win fights." Proof does she didn't press further. She trusted me, and that trust fueled me even more. By the time the HOA meeting came, I was ready. I had my lawyer on standby. I had the surveyor lined up to testify. I had every document, every photo, every timestamp organized in a neat binder. Rick, of course, showed up with nothing but his arrogance. He strutted into that meeting like a conquering hero, convinced he was about to crush me once and for all. But what he didn't realize was that I hadn't come to fight with words. I had come with evidence. And when it was finally my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I simply laid out the truth, page by page, until his smug smile began to falter. He had no idea the storm he had walked into. And by the time it was over, the only thing he'd be moving wouldn't be my fence. It would be himself, backward into humiliation and defeat. The HOA meeting was held in the community hall on a Thursday evening. A few rows of folding chairs, a long table at the front, and a microphone that crackled every time someone leaned too close. Normally these meetings dragged on about landscaping rules and parking complaints. But that night, half the neighborhood showed up. Word had gotten around that something big was about to go down. Rick strutted in 5 minutes late, cup of coffee in hand, like he owned the place. He gave me a smug grin as he took a seat 2 rows ahead. "You ready to lose, John?" he whispered, just loud enough for a few people to hear. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The meeting began with routine business, but everyone's eyes kept flicking to me and Rick. Finally, the chair cleared her throat. Next item, property line dispute, Miller versus. Anderson Rick jumped up like he'd been waiting all week. "I'll make this simple," he said, arms crossed. The fence was in the wrong spot. I corrected it. End of story murmurs spread through the room. A couple of neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Rick smirked, convinced he had already won. That's when I stood. I walked to the front, binder in hand, and placed it on the table with a quiet thud. "Actually," I said evenly, "this is the story." I opened the binder and slid out the first document, the original survey from when I purchased the property. Stamped, signed, official. Then the updated survey my surveyor had completed, just days after Rick moved the fence. Again, stamped, signed, official. The chair leaned forward. "Mr. Miller, please explain." I did, calmly, methodically, without raising my voice. I explained how the fence had stood in the same place for years, how Rick had moved it in the dead of night, and how the surveyor, who was sitting quietly in the back row, had witnessed the aftermath firsthand. Then I produced photos, time-stamped pictures from birthdays and barbecues, my kid's swing set sitting well within the yard, followed by new photos showing the swing set awkwardly straddling Rick's new fence line. The room grew silent as I laid everything out piece by piece. The evidence didn't just speak, it shouted. Rick tried to laugh it off. Photos can be faked. Lines are tricky. Everyone knows surveys aren't always accurate. That's when the surveyor stood. Clipboard in hand, he walked to the front. "With all due respect," he said, "this survey is accurate to the inch. I conducted it myself. There is no ambiguity here. Mr. Anderson moved the fence onto Mr. Miller's property, period." The weight of his words hit like a hammer. Rick's smirk faltered. He stammered something about misunderstandings, but no one was buying it. The board members whispered among themselves, then looked back at me. "Mr. Miller, your documentation is clear. Mr. Anderson, you are in violation of HOA bylaws and state property law. You are ordered to return the fence to its rightful position immediately. Additionally, you will reimburse Mr. Miller for survey costs, legal fees, and damages." The room buzzed with whispers. Some neighbors shook their heads, others avoided Rick's eyes altogether. But me, I just sat back down, calm as stone. Rick, on the other hand, turned red. He muttered under his breath, his hands gripping the chair so tightly his knuckles went white. For once the arrogance was gone. All that was left was embarrassment. The fallout was swift. Within a week, contractors arrived to tear down the stolen section of fence. Not on my dime, on his. I watched from my porch as they dug up the posts he had planted, each one yanked out like another nail in his coffin. Rick stood there, arms crossed, scowling as his victory was dismantled board by board. The neighbors didn't forget either. Where he once strutted down the block with his head high, now he avoided eye contact. Conversations hushed when he walked by. The man who thought he could steal land without consequence had been exposed for everyone to see. And the best part? I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just let the truth and the evidence do all the talking. The look on his face when the surveyor unrolled that map in front of the entire neighborhood. That was the moment I knew I had won. Rick thought he'd stolen a few feet of dirt, but what he really lost was far bigger. His reputation, his pride, and his ability to bully his way through life without pushback. And me, I got my yard back, every inch of it. It's been months since the fence came down and my yard was restored, but I still remember the sound of those posts being ripped out. To me, it wasn't just wood being pulled from the ground. It was justice being planted in its place. Today, my yard is whole again. The garden beds are right where my wife planted them. The swing set is safe in the middle of the grass, where my kids laugh and play without worry. On Saturday afternoons, I sit on the porch with a cold drink and watch the sun dip low over the fence, the real fence, standing tall exactly where it belongs. But the yard wasn't the only thing I got back. I got my peace. For weeks, Rick's arrogance had gnawed at me. His smirk, his threats, his certainty that he could steal from me and get away with it. That kind of disrespect eats at a man. It keeps you up at night, wondering if you're powerless to stop it. But standing in that HOA meeting, laying out every page of proof while he squirmed in front of the neighbors, that was the moment the weight lifted. I didn't just win back a few feet of property. I won back my dignity. Rick hasn't been the same since. he avoids me now. Where he once strutted down the block, he shuffles. Where he once cracked smug jokes, he mutters. The man who thought he was clever enough to outsmart everyone ended up exposed by his own arrogance. And the neighborhood didn't forget. People who once chatted with him stopped waving. At block parties, he stands alone. His reputation is gone, not because I spread rumors, but because the truth spoke louder than any story he could spin. Do I gloat? Number, I don't need to. Watching him tear down his own mess was satisfaction enough. What I learned through all of this is simple. Anger doesn't win battles. Proof does. If I'd screamed at Rick the first time he made a snide comment, it would have been my word against his. If I'd torn the fence down myself, I'd have been the one in trouble. But by staying calm, patient, and meticulous, I let the truth pile up until it was undeniable. That's the lesson I carry with me now. People will try to take what's yours, your peace, your dignity, even your land. Some will do it with arrogance. Some will do it with lies, but the best revenge isn't shouting or fists. The best revenge is patience. It's preparation. It's standing tall while the truth crushes them under its weight. Rick thought he'd stolen part of my life overnight, but all he really did was hand me the rope to hang him with. And every time I see that fence today, I don't just see wood and nails, I see a reminder. Boundaries matter. Respect matters. And when someone crosses the line, literally or figuratively, the truth has a way of snapping them back where they belong. He moved my fence overnight, but he couldn't move the truth. And the truth cost him everything. If this story hit home, share your thoughts below. And if you want more real stories of betrayal, justice, and survival, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned.